Good morning. So glad you're with us, and we are we are actually going to talk this morning about the very thing we just did, the remembrance of communion, as a part of what we're going to discuss this morning. But I want to start by sharing about something that happened to me when I was about 10 years old. When I was 10 years old, I had a prized possession. It was actually a set of possessions, but it meant more to me than just about anything else. It was my baseball card collection. Okay, as many 10-year-olds in the mid '80s, I had boxes upon boxes of cardboard that had pictures of grown men on them, and lots of numbers on the back, and I would study them. I knew them very well. I had some beauties. I was blessed. I've shared even recently that I had two older sisters. I was somewhat blessed in that those older sisters my older sisters had guys kind of their age, maybe 10 years older than me, who had outgrown their baseball cards, and I became like a hand-me-down, depository for people. So guys that were 10 years older than me were giving me their baseball cards, and I was getting some beauties. I had some really, really nice baseball cards. I really did. Now, of course, today they're really useful for like starting fires. They're really useful for like sitting in a corner of the basement in another big giant box. But when I was 10 years old, these baseball cards were like everything to me. I probably spent more time on them than just about anything else. And so I had this great, huge collection of baseball cards. And not only just being a fan of baseball, I was a baseball player, and growing up in sunny Florida, one of the ways that I would spend my time was that there were all kinds of like baseball camps and baseball leagues, and I was always going somewhere to go play baseball or do something. And one of the ones I went to a lot was the Ed Durkin School of Baseball. Okay? Ed Durkin was a major league scout, and he would gladly take money from families to put us into baseball camps with the hope of someday being drafted by the Milwaukee Brewers, is who he scouted for. So we were all trying to make it with the Brewers through the Ed Durkin School of Baseball, and he used all kinds of baseball facilities around the area. Well, one summer when I was about 10 years old, I was signed up for the Ed Durkin School of Baseball like I was many weeks during the summer, and my mom dropped me off on the first day of the week, that first Monday of the camp. She dropped me off at one particular baseball facility, and it quickly became apparent that like those sets of fields, they weren't going to be like big enough. They weren't going to have enough fields for all the kids who had major league dreams just like I did and were handing over hundreds of dollars just like my parents had. And so they had to move facilities like on the second day of the camp. So that first day, my mom drops me off, and then she'd arranged for a ride, someone else to give me a ride the other days of the camp. So on Monday, I get dropped off in one place, and on Tuesday, the person driving me, we go to a different facility, okay? It was an upgrade. It was great. Like everything was right in the world. And one thing that was true about the Ed Durkin School of Baseball is that on Fridays, the last day of the camp, all the kids would bring their baseball cards, and we'd do like a baseball card lunchtime. We'd trade them or we'd do whatever, okay? And so on Friday, I've got a big, fat 3-ring binder with all my baseball cards, okay? And I take them to the Ed Durkin School of Baseball. And we go in and we make I'm sure I made some great trades. I'm sure that I was wheeling and dealing, okay? I'm sure that my set had been upgraded that day. But it hit me towards the end of the day, my mom was going to pick me up on Friday, like she dropped me off on Monday. But remember, in the meantime, the facility had changed. And I love my mom very much, but like directions and locations and those kinds of things, that just wasn't her sweet spot, okay? Many, many gifts, but kind of keeping track of maps and whatnot. She's just not known for that. And so in my 10-year-old mind, I was pretty certain that mom was going to come pick me up at the original location, okay? So I said to someone one of the leaders at the camp, one of the baseball coaches, I said, here's the thing, my mom doesn't know to pick me up here. She's going to pick me up over there. Is there any way I can get over there? So, this was, again, it was the 80s. There were no permission slips or whatever. They were like, sure, hop in the back of my pickup truck and off we go. So here I am with like my baseball bag and all my equipment and my 3-ring binder of baseball cards. And we head over to the other facility and I jump out, okay? And then they get back in the truck and off they go. And I'm standing there in front of like a closed gate, just waiting and waiting and waiting, and little tears started to form. And my mind is racing. And while I'm vaguely familiar with the area, it is not anything where I could like walk to somewhere, to someone that I know. It's not even really close enough to walk to the other facility. And the panic starts to set in. And I feel like I've been forgotten. But the thing that really broke my heart that day was that I thought, the only thing I've got, the only way I'm going to be able to survive is by selling off my baseball cards. This is all I've got. There's no hope. Until eventually that same pickup truck comes burning back with, dust in its wake, and he comes up and he says, get back in this truck, your mom's back. She knew exactly where to be, and it was my fault for doubting her all along. But I had that moment. I remember it. I remember that feeling of oh no, I'm alone. Oh no, and in a 10-year-old's mind, oh no, I'm abandoned. I'm on my own. I've been forgotten. And I'm gonna have to make it on my own. And we're gonna talk today. We're gonna talk about an account or a story that comes up in this series that we're in called In the Company of Kings, where we're looking at the books of 1st and 2nd Samuel. And we're going to talk this morning about a point in time where the issue of abandonment was real and it was felt. The issue of whether or not these people were on their own, be it because of their own decisions or decisions of others, it was a real thing. And we're going to look at 1 Samuel chapter 12. If you have a Bible and you want to turn to 1 Samuel chapter 12. We've been sort of using this chronology to kind of anchor where we are in the story. And those 2 red arrows indicate the kind of 2 sections we looked at last week is where they fall in the chronology, because the books of 1st and 2nd Samuel cover about 100 years. Last week we looked at some events sort of about 3/4 of the way through Samuel's lifetime, or at least not his lifetime, but his time of influence. And then we jumped ahead to look at Saul. We looked at the rise and the fall of King Saul, that he's anointed as king, but then he quickly ruins it. Well, today we're going to actually look at a section that's sandwiched between those. It's right at the point where Saul has been anointed and Samuel is exiting. He's leaving. And so we're going to look at this passage of time, this period of time. The people had asked for a king. Samuel had been their leader, and the people had asked for a king, and God had given them a king. And now Samuel, this is sort of in some ways a farewell address. It's like his graduation speech, or his retirement toast. I've made it this far. I've done what was asked of me, and now here's the final word that I have for you. And it's found in 1 Samuel chapter 12. 1 Samuel chapter 12. If you have a Bible and you want to read along with me, if not, it's on the screen. But read along with me. 1 Samuel chapter 12, verse 1 says, Samuel said to all Israel, I have listened to everything you've said to me, and I've set a king over you. Now you have a king as your leader. As for me, I am old and gray, and my sons are here with you. I have been your leader from my youth until this day. Here I stand. Testify against me in the presence of the Lord and his anointed. Whose ox have I taken? Whose donkey have I taken? Whom have I cheated? Whom have I oppressed? For whose hand have I accepted a bribe to make me shut my eyes? If I have done any of these things, I will make it right. You have not cheated or oppressed us, they replied. You have not taken anything from anyone's hand. Samuel has a desire here. His desire is to, as he exits, as he leaves, as he's wrapping up, he has a desire to have a clean slate. To know that he's going out, and as he's going out, that he hasn't cheated anyone, he hasn't taken from anyone. This is a very human thing, right? Like Samuel wants to know that he's finishing well. He's finishing in a way that actually reflects what he intended. He's finishing in a way that doesn't have any regret, that doesn't leave anything to be made right. And notice what there in verse 4. No one says, they say, you've done none of those things. You've done none of those things. So keep reading, verse 5. Samuel said to them, the Lord is witness against you, and also his anointed is witness this day, his anointed being the king, okay, King Saul. So the Lord and the king bear witness that you have not found anything in my hand. He is witness, they said. So Samuel says, I've not profited off of you in my work here. Then Samuel said to the people, it is the Lord who appointed Moses and Aaron and brought your ancestors up out of Egypt. Now then, stand here, because I am going to confront you with evidence before the Lord as to all the righteous acts performed by the Lord for you and your ancestors. After Jacob entered Egypt, they cried to the Lord for help, and the Lord sent Moses and Aaron, who brought your ancestors out of Egypt, and settled them in this place. Keep reading, verse 9. But they forgot the Lord their God. So he sold them into the hand of Sisera, the commander of the army of Hazor, and into the hands of the Philistines and the king of Moab, who fought against them. They cried out to the Lord and said, we have sinned, we have forsaken the Lord and served the Baals and the Ashtoreths, but now deliver us from the hands of our enemies, and we will serve you. Then the Lord sent Jerubbaal, Barak, Jephthah, and Samuel, and he delivered you from the hands of your enemies all around you, so that you lived in safety. So catch what's happening here, okay? This is, if you've been with us, we've talked through this pattern. But notice what happens. So the children of Israel find themselves with God, but they begin to drift away, right? We've talked about this time after time. But look at verse 9 and what it says. It says, but along the way, God's taking care of you, but you forgot him. God didn't move. God didn't change. God was still good. God was still fighting for you. God was still on your side, but you forgot the Lord, he says to them. You forgot. They were drifting. He's emphasizing the importance of the faithful practice of life with God, of obedience to him. And notice here's this pattern. Because they forget and they begin to drift, these foreign invaders come in to punish. They come in to punish. And that happens, that occurs. The people are punished, but then they cry out to God, and God then sends a deliverer. And there's this list of people who had been God's agents of deliverance. Look at verse 12. But when you saw Nahash, king of the Ammonites, was moving against you, you said to me, no, we want a king to rule over us, even though the Lord your God was your king. Pause there for a second. See, what had happened time after time after time, those people listed before were what we call judges. They were people that God sent to deliver the children of Israel, to call them back to God. They worked as sort of like a political military leader, but they also had sort of a religious function, okay? But this one was different. This time, he says, this Ammonite king was moving in against you, and you are now saying, we want to get off the wheel. We want to get out of this pattern. We look around at our neighbors, and our neighbors have kings, and we want a king too. And Samuel puts this line there at the end of verse 12, though, right? Even though God was your king, even though you had a king, and he was better than all of those foreign kings, you're still asking for a human king. Verse 13, now, here is the king you have chosen, the one you've asked for. This he's talking about Saul. He must be there. For see, the Lord has set a king over you. If you fear the Lord and serve and obey him and do not rebel against his commands, and if both you and the king who reigns over you follow the Lord your God, good. But if you do not obey the Lord, and if you rebel against his commandments, his hand will be against you as it was against your ancestors. Stop here for a second. We start to get some conditions. Look at what happens here. So, in the past, there was this pattern where the people, yes, they would drift, but when they would cry out, the Lord would send deliverance. He would send a deliverer to rescue them. Now, there's a change here. There's a change in the pattern, and look at what the conditional statements that begin there in verse 14. It says, if you fear the Lord and serve and obey him and do not rebel against his commands, and now look at what happens in this second one. And if both you and the king who reigns over you follow the Lord your God, that's good. Do you notice what's happening here? And there's something that's not just true for them, but there's a truth in it that's true for us as well. There's these conditions that are set up, these conditions of like God's favor on the people. And they wanted a king, and they were getting a king. But now their fate was going to be tied to the fate of the king that they had chosen. Do you see this? Before this, prior to this, the fate of the people, their walk with God, their blessing with God, it was tied to their relationship with God and them directly with God. But now they've chosen a king. Now their relationship with God, their blessing with God was tied to that king as well. They were linked together. And there's a warning in this. If you were with us last weekend, we've already seen a few chapters ahead that Saul is going to ruin this pretty quickly. Okay? He's going to ruin this pretty quickly. And I think that we need to also hear a warning in this. You see, just like the children of Israel, we have a choice to have God as our king or to choose another king. That's what we're learning through this, walking through this series. We have the same choice that they had. God can be our king, or we can choose another king. But understand that our fate is tied, our future is tied to the kings that we choose. That our futures rise and fall with those kings. Unlike tying ourselves to God as king, where our future is already decided, it's already determined. We're not necessarily here talking about the conditions. We're not talking about whether or not we have plenty or we have want. We're talking about our relationship with God and his blessing on us and the hope and the joy and the peace that comes from being with him, known by him, protected by him fighting our battles. We have that as an option, just as they did. But we also so often do exactly what they did, which is we say, yeah, that's good, that's nice, but I think that I'd also like to have the God of my power, the God of my money, the God of my family, things that, again, we've looked at other kings that we create in our life. And what we do in those instances, what happens to us is that we become dependent upon those things. We become dependent upon their goodness to us and their mercy to us. And as they're dependent upon the circumstances around them, so our life becomes dependent upon them for their circumstances. And instead of our life being dependent upon God who doesn't change, who's not bound by circumstances, God who fights for us. You see, we have to make sure that we understand that the trade, the swap, when we begin to say that we're not satisfied with God as our king, we want an earthly king. So keep looking. Verse 16 says, now then, stand still and see this great thing the Lord is about to do before your eyes. Is it not wheat harvest now, which is a dry season? Is it not wheat harvest now? I will call on the Lord to send thunder and rain. And you will realize what an evil thing you did in the eyes of the Lord when you asked for a king. Then Samuel called on the Lord, and the same day the Lord sent thunder and rain. So all the people stood in awe of the Lord and of Samuel. The people all said to Samuel, pray to the Lord your God for your servant so that we will not die. For we have added to all our other sins the evil of asking for a king. It got real all of a sudden, right? Samuel's talking about decisions that were made, and now there's thunder and there's rain. There's a physical manifestation of God's power. And the people are rightly worried. They're rightly worried because they realize that yes, they'd made some mistakes, but now the mistakes are amplified. Now that it's present tense. Now it's very real. So keep reading verse 20. Do not be afraid, Samuel replied. You have done all this evil. They're not off the hook, right? He's like, no, it's okay. No, he says, no, don't be afraid. You have done evil. Yet, do not turn away from the Lord, but serve the Lord with all your heart. Do not turn away after useless idols. They can do you no good, nor can they rescue you, because they are useless. For the sake of his great name, the Lord will not reject his people, because the Lord was pleased to make you his own. As for me, far be it from me that I should sin against the Lord by failing to pray for you. And I will teach you the way that is good and right. But be sure to fear the Lord and serve him faithfully with all your heart. Consider what great things he has done for you. Yet if you persist in doing evil, both you and your king will perish. So he says, look, the reality of the situation that you now recognize, he's saying to them, that you now recognize is that you've done these wrong things, and the situation now is bad. You shouldn't have asked for this thing, but God is doing it for you. But he says, don't be governed by fear. God's still good to keep his promise. You haven't done something so bad, nothing has been done that's so wrong that God is turning away from his promise that you're his people. But he says if things don't change, there is trouble. You can still be God's people and experience trouble. It's easy to read these passages and just see them as detached history, that they're somehow less human. But these are real folks, right? These are husbands and wives and parents and children. They had work that had to be done and promises that had to be kept. And it's so easy to just distance ourselves from it and see it as something that happened to them way back when. But if we stop and ask, who are we? Who are we in this story? Who might I be in this story? I think we can come up with a couple possibilities. And the first possibility is this. When we look at this story, I think at different times, I read myself into the story as one of the Israelites. As one of the Israelites. You see, I'm just like them, I'm kind of a serial failure. Always forgetting. Never remembering what God has done. Just moving on from moment to moment, like dominated by the immediate. The idols of my stomach and my comfort, with sort of a sense all along that, I could be more, but I'm not. I could do better, but I don't. That if I'm just honest with myself, I'm probably fairly disappointed. But at this point, not sure what I can or should even do about it. And there's something in this that's said to me in that moment. I think it's telling us this. We can't go back and change how we got to where we are. We are where we are. We can't change yesterday. I think this is what Samuel is saying to the Israelites. Today became today through any number of circumstances, any number of combination of my choices, plus the choices of those around me, plus circumstances that seem like they might just be natural, but today is what it is. And look back at these verses. This is what Samuel said to them. Don't be afraid. Okay? Yes, we find ourselves in a spot where we realize I'm just sort of indifferent to God. I'm just sort of drifting with God. I keep making the same mistakes over and over again. I keep doing the same things. And Samuel says, do not be afraid. You've done all the evil, yet don't turn away from the Lord. Don't let yesterday's error become cause for today's denial of God. Don't get yourself into a spot, he says, where you allow the past to become a hindrance to the present. We can't change yesterday. Serve the Lord with all your heart. Don't turn away after the idols. They don't do you any good. They can't rescue you. The things of this world, they're useless. He's saying it doesn't matter how, at this moment, it doesn't matter how many mistakes that you've made. I realize that's hard to see, my apologies. How many mistakes that you've made. It doesn't matter how inadequate you may feel because of your past. It doesn't matter the pain that you've got because of all of those things. He's saying that stuff, it's real, but don't allow those things to become hindrances for you in the present when it comes to following God. Don't use your past, don't allow your past to become an excuse for not following God in the present. Do you have failed relationships? It's easy to say that it's too late. It's too late. Do you have addictive behaviors? Patterns that have been built in your life that it just feels like automatic. It's easy to say, I can't control it. Do you live in the fear of being abandoned or left because of your inadequacy? He's saying you're not abandoned. You're not left. We can't change yesterday. We can't change how we got to today. But in the present moment, in the here and now, we are responsible for moving forward. We are responsible for the next step of faith. And so you may be here this morning and feeling a bit like the Israelites. You may be feeling like, gosh, the past, it's such a mess. It's such a mess. How could God be faithful in the midst of all this? And the answer is he is. He is. And our responsibility to that is to live as if that past is inconsequential. It doesn't mean it goes away. It doesn't mean that the pain just disappears, but it does mean that God's with us in it, and we move forward from there. But it's also possible in some ways that you may be here this morning and feel a bit like Samuel. You may feel a bit like Samuel. You see, Samuel he'd hung in there with the people. He says, I'm old and gray. He'd done this his whole life. He'd been faithful in the long haul. And now he's rejected. Now the people have said, we don't care that you've been faithful. We don't care that you've done right. We don't care that you and God have forged a tight bond. We don't care that you hear from him. We don't want you anymore. You may feel like Samuel. And it's tempting in that. It's tempting in those moments to say to others or even to God that this isn't fair, this isn't right. Why do I have to get stuck with this? But notice Samuel's response and see this. I think what Samuel says here is that whatever your present pain, God feels it. He feels it with you and he wants you to persist. If we look back to 1 Samuel chapter 8, and I'll put this up here. 1 Samuel chapter 8, when the people first asked for a king, this is what God says to Samuel. He says, the Lord told Samuel, listen to all that the people are saying to you. It's not you that they've rejected. They've rejected me as their king, as they have done from the day I brought them up out of Egypt until this day, forsaking me and serving other gods. So they are doing to you. This is what Samuel finds himself in. You see, the abandonment that Samuel may be feeling, the fact that Samuel feels rejected, the Lord is with him in the midst of it. You see, and from that, Samuel takes this. In verse 23, we're back in 1 Samuel 12, but verse 23 says, as for me, far be it from me that I should sin against the Lord by failing to pray for you, and I will teach you the way that is good and right. Notice what Samuel says. It would have been easy for Samuel to say this. You're done with me, I'm done with you. Right? And I'll tell you, that's what I tend to do. That's my natural response. Look, I've been good to you. I've been faithful to you. And now you're treating me this way? What gives you the right? What makes you think that you can treat me that way after everything I've done? And yet that's not the response that Samuel has. And I think it's not the response that Samuel has because it's not what Samuel understood to be true about God. You see, when I get to that place, I feel like I'm alone. I feel like I'm on my own. I feel like it's just me. It's me versus the world. But the reality is that Samuel understood that the rejection that he was feeling, it wasn't his failure that was on trial. He'd been right. He'd done good. He wasn't abandoned. God was with him in the midst of it. God was the one who was being rejected by the people. He wasn't inadequate. He had everything that God had to offer with him. The people weren't rejecting him, they were rejecting God. And so in the midst of it, Samuel didn't feel a need to defend himself because God is big enough to defend himself. Samuel didn't feel the need to say, I've got to go protect myself and get away from you because God was big enough to protect him. And he did this. He did this because he was certain of what God had told him. You see, whereas the children of Israel continually forgot, Samuel remembered. He remembered that it was God who'd empowered him. It was God who won the victories. It was God who spoke through him. It wasn't him on his own. It was never him alone. It was always God. And so we're back to this issue, this idea of remembering. And it's a major reason. It's a reason that we need the church. We need the church. Not just, we do need community, but we need more than just community. We need the full practice of the church. We need the songs. We need the baptisms. We need the Lord's Supper, the bread and the cup, the prayers. We need all of it. We need it regularly. And I'm not here to try and guilt trip you into this, but I am here to tell you that it's important that you don't give up on being together in the church. And it's because forgetting is so easy. If Satan can't get us to deny God, he's going to do everything he can to get us to just dismiss and forget God. And that's really hard to do when we're invested in the life of the church. We need it to remember the essential truths. You see, it's why the author of Hebrews says these things. Verse 1, we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. Let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that easily entangles us, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. You see, the point of this is we need to be regularly confronted with the reality of what God has done for us. Because what greater picture of abandonment is there than Christ on a cross? And yet he wasn't abandoned. We need to remember that. We come to sing about it, to be reminded of it. What greater fear of being left alone than Jesus in the garden? And yet he wasn't alone. His Father was with him through it all. And so just a few chapters ahead of this, in Hebrews chapter 10, the author writes this. Let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds. Look at this, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. You see, don't give up being together. Don't give up meeting together. It's not just about us doing something. It's about not forgetting the goodness of God. It's about remembering and recalling. You see, the problems for the children of Israel, they didn't begin on that day. When they were leaving Egypt and they were in the wilderness and they were given the law, they weren't just given the law, they were given instructions. Instructions for remembering the law. And in those instructions, the entirety of the law was supposed to be read aloud on an ongoing basis. And once every 7 years, all the people were supposed to gather together to hear it read. And do you know how many times it's recorded that they practiced it over those hundreds of years? 3 times. They forgot to do it. They didn't keep the practice. It's not just religious ritual. It's practicing remembering what God's done for us and who he is. If we're going to be people who remember, we have to be people who practice the things that bring about remembrance. Would you pray with me? God, we thank you for your presence with us, your words for us. We thank you for your goodness to us, and I know that it's easy to forget. That forgetting seems to be the natural thing. God, I want to live in your goodness. I want to know not just about you, but what life with you is like. And God, would you help us to not forget, to remember the ways that you have fought for us, the things that you've done, because we know that the times are dark, and it's so easy to look at our world and forget. To forget how good you are, to forget the things that you've done and the places that you've led us and the victories that you've won. God, would you help us as we do this together, God? We ask for your favor on us. We ask that you would remind us of all these things, that you would show us that we're not alone. And God, we're here because we believe in who you are and what you've done. And we want it to not just be something that we recognize, but something that we live in. And so we give our lives to you and our time to you, and we pray all of this in Christ's name. Amen.